Assalamualaikum. Welcome. We are from Bits Group and we are from 4th semester class A, English Education Department, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, State Islamic University of Sultan Maulana Hasanuddin Banten. And in here, I wanna introduction our group. And our group, the first is Sekar Ayu, and the second is Liyanti, and the third is Amelia Damayanti. And the fourth is uswatun hasanah. Thank you. And the next is presentation.
Hello, here in this video I will give you an explanation about theoretical approaches to literature. So guys, within the world of literary studies, literary theory has developed as a distinct discipline influenced by philosophy. Literary theory analyzes the philosophical and methodological premises of literary criticism. While literary criticism is mostly interested in the analysis, interpretation, and evaluation of primary sources, literary theory tries to shed light on the very methods used in this reading of primary text. Literary theory discussion as the theoretical and philosophical consciousness of textual studies, constantly reflecting on its own development and methodology. Among the many diverse methods of interpretation, it is possible to isolate four basic approaches which provide a grid according to which most full or trends can be classified. Depending on the main purpose of these major methodologies, one can distinguish between text, author, reader, and context-oriented approaches. So number one is the text-oriented approaches. It's primarily concerned with question of the materiality of text, including edition of manuscript, analysis of language and style, and the formal structure of literary works. And then number two is author-oriented approaches. Author-oriented schools put the main emphasis on the author, trying to establish connection between the work of art and the biography of its creator. And then number three is reader-oriented approaches. This is focused on the reception of text by their audience and the text's general impact on the reading public. And the last is contextual approaches. This try to place literary text against the background of historical, social, or political developments, while at the same time attempting to classify text according to genres as well as historical periods. This classification inevitably results in a drastic reduction of highly complex theories to their most basic patterns. The following overview tries to depict the central tenets of these methodological approaches to text, both as expressions of the cultural consciousness as well as of the ideologies of the era in which they exert their major impact. The simplified categorization should not mislead the reader into believing that each theoretical school subscribes to a single invariable methodology. Despite overlaps between many of the schools, each school's general outlook is dominated by one approach. The following survey is meant to highlight and summarize the main emphasis of the most popular schools and theoretical trends in literary studies. So further detail will be explained by my friends. Thank you.
Now I will explain how about a text-oriented theoretical approach. Text-oriented theoretical approach are generally widely adopted by modern school and methodologies in literary criticism. Traditional philology, for example, highlights the material element of language, theory and style analyze the structure of meaning or the large mean of expression, and formalist structuralist school, including Russian formalism, prejudice school of structuralism. A. Philology. In literary criticism, the term philology generally denotes an approach that focuses on editorial issue and text reconstruction. Philology, which experienced its heyday in the Renaissance with the rediscovery of ancient writers. The invention of printing press and the desire of correct edition of text remain one of the dominant currents until the 19th century. Informed by the rise of modern science, this philological approach seeks to incorporate advanced empirical methodology into literary studies. Text materiality, the main concern of traditional philology, is still relevant to literary science today, as the debate over the generally accepted early bit of James Joyce edition illustrates. And B is rhetorica. Its early rhetoric mediates the rules of fluence and perfect speech and is therefore primarily prescriptive. It offers guidelines for each phase of textual composition, including inventio, or dam selection, disposio or material organization, elocution or verbalization with the help of rhetorical characters, memoria or speech recall technique, and actual speech delivery. C. Formalism and structuralism. The term formalism and structuralism cover a number of schools in the first half of the 20th century, whose main purpose lay in the explanation of the formal and structural patterns of literary texts. In its search of distinctive features of literature, formalism, Russian reject explanations that base their argument of the spirit, intuition, imagination, or genius of the poet. The morphological method developed by these formalists deliberately ignore historical, sociological, biographical dimensions, or psychology of literary discourse. On the other hand, propagates an intrinsic approach that regards works of art as independent entities. In contrast to traditional intrinsic methodologies, Russian formalism emphasizes phonetic structure, rhythms, rhymes, metrics, and sounds as meaningful elements independent of literary discourse. The main concept of the familiarization of Russian formalism in many respects anticipates the breakthrough idea of the alienation effect, working along the same line by searching the text for the collective motifs of the human soul, which are assumed to be common for different historical periods and language. This basic pattern represents a primordial picture of the human subconscious that has maintained its structure in various cultures and ages. D. New criticism. The new criticism object to evaluate criticism, search studies, investigation of the socio-historical background, and the history of motifs. It also counters biographical or psychological approach to writer, concentrated and historical acceptance. In its analysis, new criticism consequently focuses on phenomena such as multiple meanings, paradox, irony, wordplay, word, or rhetorical figure, which as the smallest distinguishable element of a literary work from interdependent relationship with the overall context, and see semiotics and deconstruction. Semiotics and deconstruction use verbal signs of markers as starting point for their analysis, arguing that nothing exists outside the text, namely that our perception of the world are textual. This text-oriented theory emphasizes the intrinsic dimension of literary works. Their main aim lies in the analysis of basic textual structures or narrative technique, plot pattern, viewpoint, style, rhetorical feature, as well as in the difference between colloquial language and literature or between prose and poetry. Semiotic and deconstruction are the most extreme example of the oriented literary criticism, which, by extending the term text to non-literary system, provide a textual way of explanation for different cultural phenomena.
And here, I would like to explain to you about author. And the first, I want to explain to you about what is biographical criticism. Biographical criticism is a form of literary criticism which analyzes a writer's biography to show the relationship between the author's life and their works of literature. Biographical criticism is often associated with historical biographical criticism. This long-standing critical method dates back at least to the Renaissance period and was employed extensively by Samuel Johnson in the past now publishing Lives of the Poets 70,081, which contains a biography gleaned mostly on the secondary sources and brief characterizations of the poet, followed by Johnson's substantive critical perspective on the poet's work as well. The goal of biographical criticism. The goal of biographical criticism is understanding why the author wrote or he or she wrote. This includes pointing out how biographical circumstances contribute of the creations of parts of the text. The text can reflect the author's own life. Biographical criticism example. The novel Invisible Man can be interpreted to many other literary criticism, but in order to achieve more concrete interpretations of the novel, a biographical criticism should be used. And the second is psychological criticism. Psychological criticism, also known as psychoanalytical criticism, is the analysis of an author's unintended message. The analysis focuses on the biographical circumstances of an author. The main goal is to analyze the unconscious elements within a literary text based on the background of the author. Use of psychological criticism. Psychological criticism is used to interpret the author's unconscious meaning in the various works, and Freud had analyzed Shakespeare's Hamlet in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. He also created an essay titled Delusions and Dreams in Johnson's Gradiva, where they analyzed the novel Gradiva by Wilhelm Johnson. Psychological criticism, for example, the work reflects the psychological state of the artist and is a manifestation of his or her expressed or repressed need, desires, ambitions, frustrations, and etc. Phenomenology studies conscious experience and experience it from the subjective or first-person point of view, and this field or of philosophy is then to be distincted from and related to the other main field of philosophy, such as ontology, the study of being or what is, and the second is epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the third is logic, the study of a valid reasoning, and the last is ethic. Ethics, the study of right and wrong actions, and etc. Basically, phenomenology studies the structure of various types of experience ranging from perception, so memory, imagination, emotion, desire, and volition to bodily awareness, embodied action, and social activity, including linguistic activity. Phenomenology is the philosophical study of observed unusual people or events as they appear without any further study or explanation. An example of phenomenology is studying the green flash that sometimes happen just after sunset or before sunrise.
Reader-oriented appraisal is a reaction to the dominant position of text-oriented criticism, a reader-oriented approach developed within the 1960s called reception theory, reader response theory, or aesthetic perception. All three terms are used almost synonymously to summarize those approaches which specialize in the reader's point of view. A number of these approaches don't postulate one objective text, but rather assume that there are as many texts as reader. This attitude implies that a brand new individual text evolves with every individual reading process. With the main focus on the effect of a text on the recipient or reader, reception theory is clearly against new criticism's dogma of affective fallacy, which demands on interpretation freed from subjective contribution by the reader. Reader-centered approaches examine the readerships of the text and investigate why, where, and when it's read. They also examine curtain reading practice of social, ethnic, or national groups. Many of these investigations also cope with and take a look at to elucidate the psychological aspect of the particular reading process. They aim at revealing certain mechanisms which are employed within the transformation of the visual sign on paper into a coherent, meaningful text within the mind of the reader. These approaches assume that a text creates certain expectation within the reader in every phase of reading. These expectations are then either fulfilled or left unfulfilled. Wolfgang Iser's 1926 term of the blank refers to the curious phenomenon of expectation stimulated by the text and filled by the reader. This principle of the blank is applied to the elementary level of the sentence, likewise on more complex units of meaning. While reading even the primary words of a sentence, the reader continually imagines how it had continued. In every phase, the reader attempts to enrich what's missing through his own imagination and skill at combination. Similarly, we continually often questions which are then connected to numerous explanatory options. The filling of the blanks on the one hand depends on subjective individual traits and on the other side on more general features like education, age, gender, nationality, and therefore the period of the reader. The reader's expectation plays a job in every form of text, but it's most blatant in literary genres like detective fiction, which depend greatly on the interaction between text and recipient. Playing with the reader's expectation occupies the foreground in detective fiction, but is additionally present in the other literary genres, though in varying intensity and clarity. Expectations are at the idea of text interpretation on every level of the reading process, from the deciphering of one word or sentence to the analysis of thematic structures of text. Reception theory therefore shifts the main focus from the text to the interaction between reader and text. It argues that the interpretation of text cannot and must not be detached from the reading individual. A further aspect, which is closely connected with this movement, is that the investigation of the reception of text by a specific readership. In reception history, sales figures are examined along with reviews in newspapers and magazines. This analysis can either observe the reception of text in one particular period or synchronic analysis, or trace changes and developments within the reception of text in literary history or diachronic analysis. The reader-centered approaches of reception theory and reception history, particularly influential within the 1970s as reaction to the dogmas of latest criticism, were pushed into the background within the 1980s by text-oriented semiotics and deconstruction, likewise as by a range of context-centered schools.
Next, a context-oriented approach. This context-oriented approach refers to heterogeneous school group and the methodology that do not consider literary text as independent work of art. This context also tries to make the context wider. This context can be history, social, and political background, literary genre, nationality, or genre. The context of the longer socio-political mechanism is Marxist literary theory. Marxist literary interpretation, for example, might see the development of the novel in the existing country as a consequence of new economic conditions for writers and readers and new methods of product of print book material. The oriented theoretical approach such as deconstruction and the new history are also intended to Marxist thought, both for its terminology and philosophical underpinnings. A. New historical system. One of the most recent developments in the field of contextual approaches is the new historical system. Regarding new historical system, a talk rated in literary studies. This approaches deliberately analyze various aspects of human self-experience, including visual arts, film, TV, fashion, articulture, music, public culture, as manifestation of the world culture, as opposed to some, such as being attracted to the non-literary phenomena from the text-oriented structuralist approaches. Culture studies adoption a composition perspective which seeks to understand the multi-faced nature of culture. B. Feminist literary theory and general theory, the most productive and at the same time the most revolutionary movement in general and a contextual approach. Feminist literary theory begins with the assumption that gender difference are an neglected aspect of traditional literary critics. Assumption that gender difference determine the act of writing and anomaly, the style, narrative structure, context, and plot of the text. Feminist literary criticals enters the domain that text-oriented formal structure school usually treat. As feminine literary critical point out, the discussion between textual, written, concert, reading, concert, or contextual approaches cannot always be rigorously unified. In interpreting literary text, it is important to which approach fit the extension text and can be right about new rules. Political or ideological motivation texts are ideal for a Marxist approach. However, this clear approach does not necessarily dominate the discussion of the text. Rather, the choice of the methodological approach should be guided firmly by the audience of the possible rules. Political or ideological motivation texts are ideal for a Marxist approach. However, this clear approach does not necessarily dominate the discussion of the text. Rather, the choice of the methodological approach should be guided firmly by the audience of the possible rules. Will reflection one's formal interest, could start of research of time trade. Okay, thank you for watching. Please forgive us if there is mistake. In the last I say, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you guys.